Hurricane Ivan was a large, long-lived, Cape Verde-type hurricane that caused widespread damage in the Caribbean and United States. The cyclone was the ninth named storm, the sixth hurricane and the fourth major hurricane of the active 2004 Atlantic hurricane season. Ivan formed in early September, had reached Category 5 strength on the Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Scale, and became the 10th most intense Atlantic hurricane ever recorded. At its peak in the Gulf of Mexico, Ivan was the size of the state of Texas. It also spawned 119 tornadoes across the eastern United States. Ivan caused catastrophic damage to Grenada as a strong Category 3 storm, heavy damage to Jamaica as a strong Category 4 storm, and then Grand Cayman, Cayman Islands and the western tip of Cuba as a Category 5 storm. After peaking in strength, the hurricane moved north-northwest across the Gulf of Mexico to strike Pensacola, Florida as a strong Category 3 storm, causing significant damage. Ivan dropped heavy rains on the southeastern United States as it progressed northeast and east through the eastern United States, becoming an extratropical cyclone. The remnant low from the storm moved into the western subtropical Atlantic and regenerated into a tropical cyclone, which then moved across Florida and the Gulf of Mexico into Louisiana and Texas, causing minimal damage. Ivan caused an estimated $18 billion in damages to the United States, making it the fifth costliest hurricane ever to strike the country. Meteorological history. On September 2, 2004, Tropical Depression 9 formed from a large tropical wave southwest of Cape Verde. As the system moved to the west, it strengthened gradually, becoming Tropical Storm Ivan on September 3 and reaching hurricane strength on September 5, 1,150 miles to the east of Tobago. Later that day, the storm intensified rapidly, and by 5 p.m. EDT, Ivan became a Category 3 hurricane with winds of 125 miles per hour. The National Hurricane Center said that the rapid strengthening of Ivan on September 5 was unprecedented at such a low latitude in the Atlantic basin. As it moved west, Ivan weakened slightly because of wind shear in the area. The storm passed over Grenada on September 7, battering several of the Windward Islands. As it entered the Caribbean Sea, Ivan re-intensified rapidly and became a Category 5 hurricane just north of the Windward Netherlands Antilles in Aruba on September 9 with winds reaching 160 mph per hour. Ivan weakened slightly as it moved west-northwest towards Jamaica. As Ivan approached the island late on September 10, it began a westward jog that kept the eye and the strongest winds to the south and west. However, because of its proximity to the Jamaican coast, the island was battered with hurricane-force winds for hours. After passing Jamaica, Ivan resumed a more northerly track and regained Category 5 strength. Ivan's strength continued to fluctuate as it moved west on September 11, and the storm attained its highest winds of 165 mph per hour as it passed within 30 miles of Grand Cayman. Ivan reached its peak strength with a minimum central pressure of 910 millibars on September 12, making Ivan the 10th most intense Atlantic hurricane on record, as of August 2007. Ivan passed through the Yucatan Channel late on September 13 while its eye wall affected the westernmost tip of Cuba. Once over the Gulf of Mexico, it weakened slightly to Category 4 strength, which it maintained while approaching the Gulf Coast of the United States. Just before it made landfall in the United States, Ivan's eye wall weakened considerably, and its southwestern portion almost disappeared. Around 2 a.m. CDT September 16, Ivan made landfall on the U.S. mainland in Gulf Shores, Alabama as a Category 3 hurricane with 120 mph per hour winds. Some hurricane information sources put the winds from Hurricane Ivan near 130 mph per hour upon landfall in Alabama and northwestern Florida. Ivan then continued inland, maintaining hurricane strength until it was over central Alabama. Ivan weakened rapidly that evening and became a tropical depression the same day, still over Alabama. Ivan lost tropical characteristics on September 18 while crossing Virginia. Later that day, the remnant low drifted off the U.S. mid-Atlantic coast into the Atlantic Ocean, and the low-pressure disturbance continued to dump rain on the United States. On September 20, Ivan's remnant surface low completed an anticyclonic loop and moved across the Florida peninsula. As it continued west across the northern Gulf of Mexico, the system reorganized and again took on tropical characteristics. On September 22 the National Weather Service, after considerable and sometimes animated in-house discussion, regarding the demise of Ivan, determined that the low was in fact a result of the remnants of Ivan and thus named it accordingly. On the evening of September 23, the revived Ivan made landfall near Cameron, Louisiana as a tropical depression. Ivan finally dissipated on September 24 as it moved overland into Texas. Records. Ivan set several new records for intensity at low latitudes. When Ivan first became a Category 3 hurricane on September 3, it was centered near 10.2 degrees north from the equator. This is the most southerly location on record for a major hurricane in the Atlantic basin. Just 6 hours later, Ivan also became the most southerly Category 4 hurricane on record in the Atlantic basin when it reached that intensity while located at 10.6 degrees north. Finally, at midnight on September 9 while centered at 13.7 degrees north, Ivan became the most southerly Category 5 hurricane on record in the Atlantic basin. Ivan had the world record of 33 6-hour periods with an intensity at or above Category 4 strength. This record was broken 2 years later by Pacific Hurricane Typhoon Ioke, which had 36 6-hour periods at Category 4 strength. This contributed to Ivan's total accumulated cyclone energy of 70.38. Scientists from the Naval Research Laboratory at Stennis Space Center, Mississippi have used a computer model to predict that, at the height of the storm, the maximum wave height within Ivan's eye wall reached 131 feet. Preparations, Caribbean. By September 5, a hurricane watch was posted for Barbados. Early on the following day, a tropical storm watch was issued for Grenada. Later that day, hurricane watches were also put into effect for St. Lucia and Martinique. A tropical storm warning was issued for St. Vincent and Grenadines and Tobago and Grenada. By 1500 UTC on September 6, the hurricane watches and tropical storm watches and warnings were upgraded to a hurricane warning and expanded to Barbados, St. Vincent and Grenadines, St. Lucia, Tobago, Grenada. Simultaneously, a tropical storm warning was issued for Trinidad. On September 7, the hurricane warning in effect for several countries was downgraded to a tropical storm warning. By September 8, all tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings were discontinued in the eastern portions of the Windward Islands. As Ivan continued westward, a hurricane watch was issued for the ABC Islands on September 8. Many schools and businesses were closed in the Netherlands Antilles, and about 300 people evacuated their homes on Curacao Section O. In the Caribbean, 500,000 Jamaicans were told to evacuate from coastal areas, but only 5,000 were reported to have moved to shelters. 12,000 residents and tourists were evacuated from Isla Mujeres off the Yucatan Peninsula. United States, in Louisiana, mandatory evacuations of vulnerable areas in Jefferson, Lafourche, Plaquemines, St. Charles, St. James, St. John the Baptist, and Tangier parishes took place, with voluntary evacuations ordered in 6 other parishes. More than one-third of the population of Greater New Orleans evacuated voluntarily, including more than half of the residents of New Orleans itself. At the height of the evacuation, intense traffic congestion on local highways caused delays of up to 12 hours. About 1,000 special needs patients were housed at the Louisiana Superdome during the storm. Ivan was considered a particular threat to the New Orleans area because dangers of catastrophic flooding. However, Plaquemines and St. Bernard parishes suffered a moderate amount of wind damage. Hurricane preparedness for New Orleans was judged poor. At one point, the media sparked fears of an Atlantean catastrophe if the hurricane were to make a direct strike on the city. These fears were not realized, as the storm's path turned further east. In Mississippi, evacuation of mobile homes and vulnerable areas took place in Hancock, Jackson, and Harrison counties. In Alabama, Evacuation in the areas of Mobile and Baldwin counties south of Interstate 10 was ordered, including a third of the incorporated territory of the city of Mobile, as well as several of its suburbs. In Florida, a full evacuation of the Florida Keys began at 7:00 a.m. EDT September 10 but was lifted at 5:00 a.m. EDT September 13 as Ivan trekked further west than originally predicted. Voluntary evacuations were declared in 10 counties along the Florida Panhandle, with strong emphasis in the immediate western counties of Escambia, Santa Rosa, and Okaloosa. Ivan prompted the evacuation of 270 animals at the Little Zoo that could in Alabama. The evacuation had to be completed within a couple of hours, with only 28 volunteers available to move the animals. Impact: Ivan killed 64 people in the Caribbean, mainly in Grenada and Jamaica, 3 in Venezuela, and 25 in the United States, including 14 in Florida. 32 more deaths in the United States were indirectly attributed to Ivan. Tornadoes spawned by Ivan struck communities along concentric arcs on the leading edge of the storm. In Florida, Blountstown, Mariana, and Panama City Beach suffered 3 of the most devastating tornadoes. A Panama City Beach news station was nearly hit by an F2 tornado during the storm. Ivan also caused over $13 billion in damages in the United States and $3 billion in the Caribbean. Southeastern Caribbean and Venezuela. Ivan passed directly over Grenada on September 7, 2004, killing 39 people. The capital, St. George's, was severely damaged and several notable buildings were destroyed, including the residence of the Prime Minister. Ivan also caused extensive damage to a local prison, allowing most of the inmates to escape. The island, in the words of a Caribbean disaster official, suffered total devastation. According to a member of the Grenadian Parliament, at least 85% of the small island was devastated. Extensive looting was reported. In all, damage on the island totaled $815 million. Elsewhere in the Caribbean, a pregnant woman was killed in Tobago when a tree fell on top of her home, and a 75-year-old Canadian woman drowned in Barbados. 3 deaths were reported in Venezuela. Over 500 homes on Barbados and around 60 homes in St. Vincent and the Grenadines were either damaged or destroyed. Jamaica. On September 11 and 12, the center of Ivan passed near Jamaica, causing significant wind and flood damage. Overall, 17 people were killed in Jamaica and 18,000 people were left homeless as a result of the flood waters and high winds. Most of the major resorts and hotels fared well, though, and were reopened only a few days after Ivan had passed. Damage on Jamaica totaled $360 million. Cayman Islands. In the Cayman Islands, Governor Bruce Dinwiddie described damage as very, very severe and widespread. Despite strict building codes which made the island's buildings well able to withstand even major hurricanes, Ivan's winds and storm surge were so strong that a quarter or more of the buildings on the islands were reported to be uninhabitable, with 85% damaged to some extent. Much of Grand Cayman still remained without power, water, or sewer services for several months later. After 5 months, barely half the pre-Ivan hotel rooms were usable. Only 2 people were killed on the islands, though at first many deaths were suspected because of the many graves that were washed up during the storm. The damage totaled $1.85 billion in the Cayman Islands. Elsewhere in the Caribbean, there were 4 deaths in the Dominican Republic. The region's Caribbean Development Bank estimates Ivan caused over $3 billion damage on island nations, mostly in the Cayman Islands, Grenada, and Jamaica. Minor damage, including some beach erosion, was reported in the ABC Islands. Even though Ivan did not make landfall on Cuban soil, its storm surge caused localized flooding on Santiago de Cuba and Granma, on the southern part of the island. At Cienfuegos, the storm produced waves of 15 feet, and Pinar del Rio recorded 13.3 inches of rainfall. While there were no casualties on the island, the Cuban government estimates that about $1.2 billion of property damage were directly due to Ivan. United States. Along with the 14 deaths in Florida, Ivan is blamed for 8 deaths in North Carolina, 2 in Georgia, and 1 in Mississippi. An additional 32 deaths were reported as indirectly caused by the storm. Ivan caused an estimated $13 billion in damage in the United States alone, making it the 3rd costliest hurricane on record at the time, just behind Hurricane Charley's $14 billion, and above Hurricane Hugo. It has since fallen to 6th place. Florida. As Ivan made landfall on the U.S. coastline in Florida, there was heavy damage as observed in Pensacola, Gulf Breeze, Navarre Beach, and Pensacola Beach, dwellings situated far inland, as much as 20 miles from the Gulf Coast, along the shorelines of Escambia Bay, East Bay, Blackwater Bay, and Ward Basin in Escambia County and Santa Rosa County, and Fort Walton Beach, Florida on the eastern side of the storm. The area just west of Pensacola, including the community of Warrington, Perdido Key, and Inverarity Point, took the brunt of the storm. Some of the subdivisions in this part of the county were completely destroyed, with a few key roads in the Perdido area only opened in late 2005, over a year after the storm hit. Shattered windows from gusts and flying projectiles experienced throughout the night of the storm were common. As of December 2007, roads remained closed on Pensacola Beach because of damage from Ivan's storm surge. In Pensacola, the Interstate 10 Escambia Bay Bridge was heavily damaged, with as much as a quarter-mile of the bridge collapsing into the bay. The causeway that carries U.S. Highway 90 across the northern part of the same bay was also heavily damaged. Virtually all of Perdido Key, an area on the outskirts of Pensacola that bore the brunt of Ivan's winds and rain, was essentially leveled. High surf and wind brought extensive damage to Inverarity Point. On September 26, 2006, over 2 years after Ivan struck the region, funding for the last 501 FEMA provided trailers ran out for those living in Santa Rosa and Escambia counties. Alabama. The city of Demopolis, over 100 miles inland in west-central Alabama, endured wind gusts estimated at 90 mph, while Montgomery saw wind gusts in the 60 to 70 mph range at the height of the storm. The heaviest damage as Ivan made landfall on the U.S. coastline was observed in Baldwin County in Alabama, where the storm's eye made landfall. High surf and wind brought extensive damage to Orange Beach near the border with Florida. There, 2 5-story condominium buildings were undermined to the point of collapse by Ivan's storm surge of 14 feet. Both were made of steel-reinforced concrete. Debris gathered in piles along the storm tide, exacerbating the damage when the floodwaters crashed into homes sitting on pilings. Brewton, a community about 50 miles inland, also suffered severe damage. In addition to the damage to the southern portions of the state, there was extensive damage to the state's electrical grid. At the height of the outages, Alabama Power reported 489,000 subscribers had lost electrical power, roughly half of its subscriber base. Elsewhere in the United States, further inland, Ivan caused major flooding, bringing the Chattahoochee River near Atlanta and many other rivers and streams to levels that are near 100-year records. The Delaware River and its tributaries crested just below their all-time records set by Hurricane Diane in 1955. Locations in southern New Hampshire and Massachusetts received over 7 inches of rainfall from the remnants of Ivan, causing flooding and mudslides. In western North Carolina, many streams and rivers reached well above flood stage in an area that was heavily flood damaged just a week and a half prior from the remnants of Hurricane Francis, causing many roads to be closed. High winds contributed to widespread power outages throughout the mountainous region. The Blue Ridge Parkway as well as Interstate 40 through the Pigeon River Gorge in Haywood County, North Carolina sustained major damage, and landslides were common across the mountains. There was major flooding along the French Broad River and Swannanoa River in Asheville, North Carolina and along the Pigeon River near Canton, North Carolina. As a result of the rain, a major debris flow of mud, rocks, trees, and water surged down Peaks Creek, near Franklin, North Carolina, sweeping away 15 houses and killing 5 people. The system also spawned deadly tornadoes as far north as Maryland and destroyed 7 oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico while at sea. While crossing over the mid-Atlantic states, Ivan's remnant spawned 117 tornadoes across the eastern United States, with the 40th tornadoes spawned in Virginia on September 17 setting a daily record for the Commonwealth. Ivan then moved into the Wheeling, West Virginia and Pittsburgh area, causing major flooding and gusty winds. Pittsburgh International Airport recorded the highest 24-hour rainfall for Pittsburgh, recording 5.95 inches of rain. Ivan's rain caused widespread flooding. The Juniata River basin was flooded, and the Frankstown branch crested at its highest level ever. After Ivan regenerated in the Gulf of Mexico, it caused further heavy rainfall up to 8 inches in areas of Louisiana and Texas. Canada, on the morning of September 21, the remnant mid-level circulation of Ivan combined with a frontal system. This produced a plume of moisture over the Canadian Maritimes for 4 days, producing heavy rainfall totaling 6.2 inches in Gander, Newfoundland. High winds of up to 89 mph downed trees and caused power outages in Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, and eastern Nova Scotia. The system produced intense waves of up to 50 feet near Cape Bona Vista. The system killed 2 when it grounded a fishing vessel and was indirectly responsible for 4 traffic fatalities in Newfoundland. Aftermath: Grenada suffered serious economic repercussions following the destruction caused by Ivan. Before Ivan, the economy of Grenada was projected to grow by 4.7%, but the island's economy instead contracted by nearly 3% in 2004. The economy was also projected to grow by at least 5% through 2007, but, as of 2005, that estimate had been lowered to less than 1%. The government of Grenada also admitted that government debt, 130% of the island's GDP, was unsustainable in October 2004 and appointed a group of professional debt advisors in January 2005 to help seek a cooperative restructuring agreement with creditors. More than $150 million was sent to Grenada in 2004 to aid reconstruction following Ivan, but the economic situation remains fragile. The International Monetary Fund reports that as difficult enough as the present fiscal situation is, it is unfortunately quite easy to envisage circumstances that would make it even more so. Furthermore, shortfalls in donor financing and tax revenues, or events such as a further rise in global oil prices, pose a grave risk. Jamaica, by 2 days after Ivan's passage, USAID, a unregistered trademark hurricane recovery program, distributed emergency relief supplies for families who were displaced by the storm. During Phase 1 of the recovery program, communities restored 3 tourist sites, cleared agricultural lands, and completed disaster mitigation. In addition, the U.S. Peace Corps completed 30 small projects in rural communities and low-income neighborhoods. 66 health clinics, 25 schools, and 62 water and sanitation systems were repaired during the first phase of recovery. About 1,379 farmers, herders and micro-businesses became eligible for grants. By 2005, 55 schools and colleges were repaired, while restoration of 1,560 houses had occurred. United States, on September 27, 2004, then-President of the United States George W. Bush submitted a budget to the United States Congress which requested over $7 billion in aid to victims of Hurricane Ivan and Jan in the following states: Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Over half of the $7 billion was to cover uninsured damage to property and public infrastructure. $889 million was spent to repair Department of Defense facilities. About $600 million was earmarked for emergency repairs to highways and road damaged by Hurricanes Charley, Francis, Ivan, and Jan. The Small Business Administration used $472 million to provide loans for small businesses and homeowners affected by the storm. Approximately $400 million was given by the United States Department of Agriculture to provide financial assistance to agricultural producers suffering crop and other losses. Around $132 million was used to repair federal facilities by several government agencies, including United States Coast Guard, Federal Bureau of Prisons, the United States Forest Service, and the Federal Aviation Administration. The United States Army Corps of Engineers used $81 million for restoration of coastal areas affected by Ivan. In addition, $50 million of which was for disaster and famine assistance funds Grenada, Jamaica, and Haiti. Following the storm in Alabama, more than 167,700 people applied for assistance in 65 counties in the state. Over 51 counties in the state became eligible for public assistance. As a result, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Alabama Emergency Management Agency received $735 million, which was spent in disaster assistance, and included low-interest loans for homeowners and businesses, disaster food stamps, disaster unemployment assistance to those left unemployed as a result of Ivan, Project Rebound, and to fill the 5,856 National Flood Insurance Program claims. In addition, there were repairs to public infrastructure such as roads, bridges, buildings, utilities, facilities, and parks. 20 disaster recovery centers were opened in 13 counties, which also included the Porch Creek Indian Reservation. Overall, FEMA paid 90% of the $735 million, while the AEMA paid for the other 10%. Ivan is suspected of bringing spores of soybean rust from Venezuela into the United States, the first ever occurrences of soybean rust found in North America. Since the Florida soybean crop had already been mostly harvested, economic damage was limited. Some of the most severe outbreaks in South America have been known to reduce soybean crop yields by half or more. Following the storm, more than 138,500 residents in 15 counties of the Florida Panhandle applied for federal and state aid. In those counties, a total of $162.6 million was approved by FEMA Unregistered Trademark S Individuals and Households Program. In addition, residents of 24 other countries in Florida were eligible for grants and loans. By September 2005, more than $1.4 billion in federal and state assistance was approved for residents in communities in Florida Panhandle. In addition, the National Flood Insurance Program paid nearly $869 million for more than 9,800 insurance claims after Ivan. More than $4 million in disaster assistance was approved for Mississippi by FEMA and Mississippi Emergency Management Agency. In addition, the SBA issued nearly 3,000 applications for low-interest loans to homeowners, renters, landlords, businesses, and non-profit organizations. The loans covered up to $200,000 in real estate repairs replacements and up to $40,000 in repairs replacements of personal property. Residents and business owners in 8 parishes of Louisiana became eligible for disaster assistance. By 1 week before the deadline to apply on November 15, 2004, about 9,527 residents applied for disaster assistance. Overall, FEMA and the government of Louisiana provided more than $3.8 million to those that requested assistance. In addition, the SBA also allowed applications for loans to repair personal property until that day. Retirement. This storm marked the third occasion the name Ivan had been used to name a tropical cyclone in the Atlantic, as well as the fifth of 6 occurrences worldwide. Because of the severe damage and number of deaths in the Caribbean and United States, the name Ivan was retired in the spring of 2005 by the World Meteorological Organization and will never again be used in the Atlantic Basin. It was replaced by Eagle, which was retired after its use in the 2010 season. Hydrological records. Ivan broke several hydrological records. It is credited with possibly causing the largest ocean wave ever recorded, a 91-foot wave that may have been as high as 131 AFT, and the fastest seafloor current, at 2.25 ams. See also: Hurricane Ivan tornado outbreak, list of Category 5 Atlantic hurricanes, list of Florida hurricanes, list of North Carolina hurricanes, list of retired Atlantic hurricane names, list of wettest tropical cyclones in the United States, timeline of the 2004 Atlantic hurricane season, notes. References. External links: NHC Tropical Cyclone Report for Hurricane Ivan, NHC Advisory Archives for Hurricane Ivan, HPC Rainfall page for Ivan. Thanks for the page views. Ivan may just be a messenger. Waves hit Navarre Pier hard during Hurricane Ivan's approach as found in the State Library and Archives of Florida.